Hello, hello, everyone. This is Brandon Jones, CEO of Gravy. I'm so excited right now to introduce a longtime friend, somebody I really respect professionally, and just an overall entrepreneur and hustler, Miss Sherika Ekpo. She is somebody I've known from earliest days at Howard University. She has emerged as a leader in corporate, and chief officer at a company called Anaplan. Before that, we intersected at Google. She's been around the block there. She kind of was an early pioneer of the fractional model. So she operates as a fractional CHRO through her brand, Sherika Ekpo Enterprises. So as you get to know her a little bit, and if you think that this is something that might be interesting for you to explore as a model, or you have needs in your network, or yourself may need needs, she's definitely somebody who I put up in the top 1% of professionals. But today we're here for what I get excited about, which is the ownership conversation. She is about, I think, 11, 12 days in to becoming the first franchisee of a brand called Pecan Jacks in Atlanta. And so there's a whole story around how she came across this brand, how she ultimately became the first franchisee for this brand in Atlanta. But a lot of the folks in our network, and we just last week had Mr. Shaquan Lewis, who's the president of Crunch Fitness, join and kind of talk about things from an executive perspective, and what are the things you should be looking at, from his lens. But Sharika is somebody who was on the ground looking at different franchise opportunities, did the calculus, decided to take a leap for a brand, has a long story, a long road to kind of opening up the brand. And now
Mhm.
she's hot off the presses, getting the work done a couple weeks in. So that's my intro. Without further ado, I just want to say welcome, Sharika. We appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much, Brandon. Thank you for having me, and I'm excited to share my story with the Gravy family.
Excellent, excellent. So it's a lot of places we can go with this conversation. But I think first let's just understand a little bit around who you are, your journey to corporate. And then specifically, when did you realize and get serious about doing some things off the court on the ownership front? When did that become important to you? How did you fold that into, your corporate career and try to figure out how to kind of make these things complement each other?
Yeah, well, first, thank you again for the invitation, and you know, our intersection at Howard University in the School of Business specifically definitely lends itself to the dreams and aspirations that I have grown over the years. And so leaving Howard University, many of us went on to corporate America, as did I, and I took the finance track, and that was great, but definitely wanted more. And so I went back to business school full time and came out of business school and wanted to pivot a bit. And so I left business school and went into the public sector, went into the federal government, where I spent 10 years, and spent time at places like Homeland Security and the White House and the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, but then got tapped because at that time you were at Google, Brandon, and I saw you moving and shaking, and the tech industry was blowing up, and definitely wanted to be a part of that. And again, then I wanted more. And so when I got the opportunity to move from Washington, D.C. to the Bay Area with Google, it opened up a whole new world for me. And so I went into the tech space and used that as a launching pad for me in my career. And upon leaving Google, I joined a software company where I became the chief diversity officer and, did very well at Anaplan, but yet wanted more. And so as the company began to grow, we were acquired by a private equity firm. And at that point, I was given the opportunity to become the CHRO and didn't know that I could do it, but wasn't afraid of the opportunity, just know I needed support. And so went on to do to be the CHRO, and that was a wonderful opportunity, but yet again I still wanted more. And when I say more, it's not more professionally, but it was more so wanting a more rounded approach to life in general. Because when I look back on my professional career, I would say yes, it's been successful, but it's hard to balance. People always talk about titles, and I will tell you all the most important title that I have is mom. I'm the proud wife and mother, wife to Ayaname Ekpo and mother to three beautiful children. And throughout my career, I've always had to juggle home and work, and that's not an easy path. And so, as I continued to climb the corporate ladder, I was yearning for something that would allow me to have a little more structure and balance. And then also, sitting in the CHRO seat, there's no secret that we have to hire and fire folks. And the firing part is not my favorite, right? And so I walked through and sat through a number of layoffs and a number of um, crying spells and having to deliver bad news. And it hit me one day that I wanted to be in control of my own destiny. I wanted to be able to control the legacy that I was leaving for my family and have more autonomy over what it means to build generational wealth and not just wait for a corporate payout or an equity package. And so my husband and I started really exploring, entrepreneurship as a means to build generational wealth. And we explored a number of different paths, Brandon, to include, starting our own business from scratch, but also really leaned into franchising because franchising provides a blueprint of sorts for those to follow. And one thing I can say over the years, I've joined several organizations and, I lean into my mentors to understand their experiences. But if you give me the blueprint, I can follow it. And so franchising was the right model for me because one, I wanted to make sure that I could actually find a brand, create a name, and do it at a reasonable pace. Two, I wanted support from a community. And when you franchise, not only do you become a business owner, but you also are folded into this franchise community with the brand and other franchisees. And then three, I realized that it was an opportunity for me to grow and scale in a way that I thought would be most advantageous to the time and talent that my family has at the moment. So while we are the founding franchisee of Pecan Jackson, we opened our first store in Atlanta. The goal is to have a territory, right? And so we would like to have 5 stores in this Atlanta market and then expand further north in the future.
Wow. Well, it's a lot in there. And let me step back a little bit because, and I was telling Sharika this a couple of days ago. When I first met her, I remember literally the day. And I remember walking into the School of Business, going towards the student council office. And then she came out and I think we just kind of met and started talking. I remember just thinking like, man, she got her stuff together. And I was inspired at that point because I realized that, there's levels to this. And I kind of felt like she had already had this level of polish that I saw. And I was like, it stood out to me. And so I wasn't surprised when I'm at Google, she hits me up one day. She's like, I'm here, right? And we're kind of talking about just the journey into tech and how tough it was and how she found her
Hmm.
way in tech. And I remember leaving and watching her go to Anaplan, which at the time was actually a company we had been using because I was in the sales, marketing, go to market space. And they were doing a lot of the planning and the territory planning, et cetera. So I was familiar with the tool. So when she went there and she became chief diversity officer and then ultimately interim chief HR officer, I was like, wow, so she's moving and shaking. And so this idea of juggling that you mentioned, you're a master at it, right? Because
Thank
you've
you.
done these things and you've been very effective. And so you talked a little bit about, kind of the why, which is I'm a mom first. And so, I look at the things that I do off the court as really being what's most important to me. And so I look at my life holistically and I want to provide something that maybe I can give, as a wife and a mom to the next generation. Also, something that allows me to focus my skills on things that I control. So, as a chief HR officer, you're dealing with some thorny issues that you didn't create. Let me create my own thorny issues and deal with my own.
Right.
Is part of it too. But let's talk about the leap, right? Because I think one thing that's really special about having this conversation with you is you're somebody who has hit the executive ranks, call it
Mhm.
golden handcuffs, whatever you want to call it. It is really hard to leave after you get to a certain point, right? In corporate, and the idea of stepping out and taking this risk into the unknown. Some of it you address with the franchise model, which there's a playbook there, but
Right.
is like, what's the financial trade-offs, right? What is it going to take from an investment perspective that I have to write a check for to get this thing going? What am I foregoing, right? In order to kind of build an opportunity that I hopefully can grow and expand. Again, my equity, my ownership. And these things come with risk calculation. These
Yep.
things come with, actual investment, time. Can you help us like, as you kind of talked about some of the entrepreneur moves you were making, but what was your calculus? Like, how did you know when was the right time to make that move? And how did you prepare yourself to take that step from you know, I'm going from a locked in, quote unquote, secure. We can talk about how secure corporate is nowadays. That's a whole other conversation. In theory, I'm giving up the security to pursue something that, is less secure. What were the considerations? How did you think about the preparation process? What were the key milestones that you felt like you needed to put in place to kind of, really get serious about it?
So it's interesting you asked that because I think being a corporate executive, right there were a number of opportunities for me to be handsomely rewarded financially. And I remember thinking about those bonus checks and equity checks and figuring out what I want to do with it. And so for a while, we just kind of invested it and sat it on the side with the expectation that we would always move to some sort of entrepreneurial model, whether that be investing in real estate, investing in franchising or something, but we just didn't know what and when. And the reason I left Anaplan is because we were brought out by a PE firm. And at that point, there was a change in leadership. And I remember praying because I'm a very spiritual person and said, okay, God, like, is this my time to like rest? And is this my time to go out on my own? And the answer was do both. And so while I was resting, people were hitting me up. And that's how Shaw Expo Enterprises started with the fractional CHRO model. But I was very careful not to overload my portfolio or my plate because I always had this yearning to go out and franchise. And so you all know the computers listen and your phones listen to you and all that kind of stuff. So as I must be talking to my husband at night about franchising, LinkedIn is sending me all these things about franchising, and my phone is starting to send me opportunities that I didn't search or ask for, by the way. And so I thought it was serendipitous that, different opportunities started to come my way. And we started to invest and really do some research around health and wellness. Because coming out of the pandemic, health and wellness was a big thing. People spent a lot more time outside and we were not tethered to our offices. And so people started to really lean into, being healthy and finding ways to get more active. And so we thought that would be a good route to go. What we realized is there's so many options. And when you start your franchising journey, one of the very first things you do once you have a discovery call is, you get to the FDD, the franchise disclosure agreement. And those things are 100 pages plus. So there is a lot to read. But what we would often do, our anniversary, my husband and I's wedding anniversary is every March. We would take some of these documents and dedicate some of the time on our one-on-one time on our trips to really talk about business. And while we're talking about business, we would go through the play-by-play for some of the options that we were weighing from a franchise perspective to find out which ones really aligned with our goals. And when we talk about our family goals, we were looking for a franchise that allowed us to not be the full owner operator model like right Chick-fil-A, you must be in store all day, every day. And while I love that engagement, that wasn't right for me because I still wanted to run my fractional CHRO business, but I want to have my hand in the franchise, but trust, a general manager or someone to run the day-to-day for me. And so as we were looking at the different opportunities, we stumbled across Pecan Jacks. It wasn't in the traditional sense that I got an email or I saw, I saw an advertisement of some sort. It was actually on spring break with my entire family. We went to the Destin, Florida area. And one night after dinner, the children said, hey, I want some ice cream. Can we get ice cream? And of course, on vacation, everybody eats ice cream. You kind of get off your diet and your workout plan and you go and you splurge a little bit. And so we took the children to get ice cream. But the first place that we went to down on the beach area it was less than desirable. We walked into the ice cream shop, the AC was broken, it had a little funky smell. So I immediately walked out and said, let's get on Google and find something else. The other shop that came up was Pecan Jacks, and it was only a few blocks away. And so we made our way down to Pecan Jacks only to find the line out the door to the corner. And I was like, well, I guess we have no choice but to stand in this line. And so we stood in the line. It actually went pretty fast. But as we approached the door, someone came out of the store to greet us. So that was my first introduction to Pecan Jacks, right? It was like this excellent customer service. They wanted to know who we were and what brought us to the beach area. And then they wanted to know what our favorite ice cream flavors were so that they could give us things to taste before we got to the ordering counter so that they could move the process along. Long story short, we got all the ice cream our hearts could desire. The kids get the ice cream, and now the store is getting ready to close. And what do they say? Oh, I'm thirsty. I need some water. And so I had to go back in the store at 9:59, no less, because it closed at 10 to get water. And there was only 3 people in the store, the owner, a customer in front of me, and me. And I stood behind by the water cooler listening to them talk and catch up. Because one thing about Pecan Jacks is it's a family business. And so many families come back year after year, break after break, and they keep up with each other. And so the owner was talking with the customer about her kids growing up and what they were doing now. And one of the things she said is, Tim and I are thinking about franchising because we want to create a retirement plan for us. We've been in the business a while. And I kind of stopped and I kept listening. And when they finished talking, I went to purchase my water and I jumped out, took a leap of faith and said, should I let her know that I was eavesdropping or just keep my mouth shut? And I decided to say, hey, I overheard you saying that you're looking to franchise. My husband and I are also looking at different franchise opportunities and would love to learn more about your timeline. And her first question back to me was, well, where do you live? And I said, Atlanta. And that response got a visceral reaction. It got like a true physical reaction. And she kind of jumped a little bit. And I said, well, why that reaction? And she says, well, 30% of the customers in this store live in Atlanta. They just have a second home here. So if we were ever thinking about a spot for a franchise, Atlanta would be our first choice. And I literally looked up and said, okay, God, I hear you. Because just weeks before, we had walked away from a different franchise deal because our values were misaligned and we were getting some gut feelings and vibes that weren't right. And so we decided to walk away. Well, fast forward talking to Ronnie, she says, we're not ready to franchise yet. We need to do some development, but let's stay in touch. I'm in HR. People say stay in touch all the time. They don't always stay in touch, but we did. Emailed for the every month for the next 4 months. And in August of 2023, Ronnie sent me a text and said, I'm ready. Are you willing to take this journey with me and be our founding franchisee for Pecan Jacks? And I told her yes. She says, if you're willing, I'm willing. So let's do it. And here we are. Wow. A year and a half later with the successful launch of our first store in Atlanta, Georgia.
Wow, that's a story. That is a story right there. When I kind of pull the strings on it, a few things kind of come to mind. I think the power to prepare mind, right? So you had done the work of saying, I know what I want out of life. I know what I don't want out of life. There's obviously a lot of questions I need to answer, but I've been playing around with this franchising model. I've been floating around with it. And so, as they say, if you buy a new car, a certain color, that's all you see. And so you
Right.
antennas up, right? And it just so happens you're in the right place at the right time. And it was a combination of that prepared mind and serendipity got you to a place where just a series of events happen, right? That's number one. The second piece, I want to dive into this a little bit is
Yep.
you're introducing a model that I think a lot of folks in our network aren't as familiar with how this all plays out, but it gave you one, a mentality as you approach kind of what was next for you and the ability to actually execute on a playbook that's in between corporate and in between entrepreneurship, which is this fractional model. And so we talked about this. We can have a whole conversation of this fractional model thing, but I do want to put a little pin on that because I think it's something that a lot of folks in our network probably should be exploring. They just don't know enough about how it works. But that
Yes.
would be part of how you thought about this in between stage of exiting one opportunity, thinking about what's next, having some intention around where you thought the opportunity, what it would look like, and then having an arrangement that can complement that as you built it out. And then the third thing is obviously the journey of starting a franchise, which we'll get into that in a minute because I know that's
Yeah.
been a story as well. But walk us through a little bit around this fractional model. What is a fractional? In this case, CHRO. How does one position themselves to be a fractional X, whatever it might be, CFO, chief sales officer, whatever it might be? What are the frameworks that, kind of constraints around that? Just give us a little bit of an introduction to that. And I think that's important because just having that mindset of I can go out and I can continue my path as a executive while also building some flexibility to kind of suit a more holistic set of goals that I have.
Yeah. Well, I will say the fractional model was something that I was introduced to by some women in chief, which is an existing network of executives. And I had joined that network back in 2021. After exiting Anaplan, I told you it was a both and. I was sitting on the bench to rest, and people kind of hit me up around consulting opportunities. And so consulting is the model that we're most familiar with, right? And consulting is the opportunity to support a project or a business, either full time or part time for a variety of services based on whatever your expertise is. But what I found with the fractional model was I was able to leverage my past experiences and, more importantly, my past executive experiences, my executive presence, and my leadership skills to small to middle sized businesses who couldn't afford a full time CHRO or Chief Human Resources Officer, but still needed the framework and the guidance of how to set up certain processes to make sure that their business could grow and scale at a pace commensurate with whatever their vision was. And so for me, the CHRO fractional work just kind of it evolved in a way that I truly wasn't expecting, but it made a lot of sense. And I say that because the model by which I have a portfolio of clients, a very small portfolio, less than 5, that I provide that I am on retainer with and provide a certain number of services. So in my case, I normally don't do more than 3 HR corporate or functional areas, right? I'll say I'll provide you with support on performance management, recruiting, and employee relations. For that, they get the expertise as well as the execution in those functional areas. But more importantly, as they go to their investors, as they have their vision and goal setting activities for the year, and as they go to their customers, they need to present a whole team. And sometimes they can't afford to present a whole team. And quite honestly, they can't afford that talent full time. And so what I've been able to do is to be much more selective in a fractional model than I would be in a consultant model because I'm lending my name and my brand to these businesses and as well as my expertise. And so I do that right now. I have 2 clients that I serve as a fractional CHRO for. Um, and, as I think about my time between now, the franchise and my clients, I've just been very transparent with this new business venture and still being able to provide them with support. But I feel good that I have been with my clients now for 2 years and provided them with the foundational HR support that they needed. So now we're on a more consistent and recurring basis as opposed to kind of foundational setup and creating new processes. So listen, the fractional model does allow some flexibility in that your brand and your expertise is leveraged and you are on retainer. Consulting is a great opportunity, but to me, that's a broader scope than it would be for folks who are looking at getting into the fractional models.
Got it. No, I appreciate you kind of going down that path because, a lot of folks in our network are probably at a level where they can explore it, but have never really been exposed to it or understand how it works. So when you mentioned you ran to, a woman in your network who
Yep.
introduced you, it was very compelling, for reasons that would make it compelling to a lot of people in our network. And so the last question I asked you on that, and I think some of the things I heard was obviously there's flexibility. You choose your clients, right?
Yep.
But the difference between consulting, you might be in the back, right? You might just be behind the scenes making things happen. As a chief fractional officer, you're part of the team and you're being presented as part of the team. You're on the website, you're coming in to the most important meetings, you're advising on the most important parts of their strategy. You're selling and you're monetizing what you've achieved over the last 20 years in your career. And you're ultimately kind of getting the respect and also the responsibility, strategic
Mm.
support that comes with that. How do people kick it off? So I think that's probably a big question, right? Where even in consulting, I think a lot of folks on that work might be considering consulting as well. They don't know how to get clients. They don't know how to market themselves. They don't know how to convert existing relationships. What would be the best advice you would provide someone who's trying to understand, okay, I'm interested in exploring that next step to getting that first client? Like, what would you advise people?
So, what's interesting is you have to tell people what your goals are. And I think the reason why people find it difficult is because they're generally in a corporate space and they can't really say out loud what their true goals are because it may compete with their full time job. That wasn't my experience because I had left my full time job. And so, upon leaving, I was very clear with folks that, hey, if you needed some support from an HR perspective, I was willing to give it. Um, so for me, what I would tell folks is if you're interested, let people know that you're interested. Some of my consulting clients did turn into a fractional role, and it was because the client realized the value. When you consult on short-term projects, sometimes you're in for 60 days, 90 days, maybe even a year, but you are very targeted in what it is that you're working on, so you're in and you're out. Here, what I would often do is obviously perform above and beyond expectation, but kind of always give them something else to look forward to. Because the next question would be, then who can perform those duties? And the answer was me. So it was like, if they gave me an opportunity as a consultant, I would then deliver what they asked, but then also give them an opportunity to see what the broader scope would look like or how I could help them achieve their vision. And then would ask the question, would you like me to help you hire somebody to do that? Or would you like me to do that for you on a part time basis? And this is what that would look like. And many companies are still new to this model as well. I think that it's much like the gig economy. It'll continue to grow in a way that we haven't seen before because people are interested in more things now as opposed to when my parents were working where they stayed at the same job for 30 years. And so for me, somebody like me that's kind of a busybody, I get to do the best of both worlds. Like I'll consult on my fintech client in the morning, my government client here, and then I'll go and do my franchising. And that variety keeps me excited. It keeps me engaged and it really allows me to grow and learn in a way that I can help my clients because those diverse experiences really do benefit us all.
Love that. Love that. All right. So thank you for blessing us with some insights from someone who's been in this, chief fractional officer game and kind of giving us, not just the upside, but also some of the considerations as well. But really what motivates you is the opportunity to kind of design your life. I mean, for lack of a better term. Okay. So let's get back to the franchising focus here. We had, as I mentioned, the president of Crunch Fitness on. He was saying at the end of the day, the FDD, which you mentioned, the franchise definition document, I'm not exactly sure what it stands for, is
Closure. Yep.
document is the place that you need to go through with a magnifying glass. All right. And I know you looked at a bunch of businesses before you partnering with Pecan Jacks, and we'll get into that. So give us a segue into like what are some of the experiences you had as you kind of looked at a number of different franchise options. You mentioned there was one that just didn't sit right with you and it kind of
Yep.
turned you off. Would love to hear a little bit more around that process of discovery and going into these FDDs. The second piece of the question is becoming the first franchisee and how you thought about the risk and opportunity when you finally found, kind of, I think spirit wise, your franchise spirit animal, but then it came down to the details, right? And how you kind of started that process of really nailing down what does this mean to be the first brand? How do you compare what was clearly defined in the FDD for some of the stuff you looked at before and how much of that existed in this new situation and or, didn't exist and how you thought about those considerations?
Okay, so let's start with the discovery. So right, the FDD is really like the beginning. So once you start to let me take a step back. As we were thinking about franchising, I am a strong proponent of coaching. Period. I coach people and I like to be coached. As an executive, I had two coaches. I had two executive coaches in my job as a C-suite executive. One for the business and the work, and it was because I had gaps in my CHRO experience, and I wanted to make sure that I could always have someone that could give me insights and challenge me to look at problems a different way. And then one from a leadership coach as well, right? One I paid for on my own, one the company paid for, but nonetheless, it was required for me. The same applies for franchising. There are people out there that are franchise consultants. They help you identify opportunities that match your risk tolerance, your equity investment, as well as your lifestyle. And so Eric Chenault is a guy here in Atlanta. And BJ, remind me to share his information with you so that we can share it with the larger Gravy family. Was there to say, hey, what is it that you're interested in? And how would you like to move forward with franchising? And he did not help me find Pecan Jacks. That's not what I'm saying. But people like Eric are available who can actually have you fill out a questionnaire and match your experiences with the opportunities that are available. Once you get past that part and you start to really identify a handful of brands and you get to the franchise disclosure agreement or document, while it's 125 plus pages, there are key parts of the FDD that really matter. One is the fees page, right? You want to know how much investment you and your family will have to make in order to get the franchise off the ground. You also want to know how much you got to pay them in royalties to leverage their blueprint. Okay. And so a lot of that is really in like the first 10 to 15 pages. So you can read the fine print later, but you want to take a look at the first, I would say, 10 to 15 pages of an FDD to really get the meat and potatoes of how that franchise operates. You also want to understand their profit margins, their cost of goods sold, or whatever the business is. The second thing is once you get to a point where you say, yep, this is something I'm interested in, and you start the conversations with them, you get to what's called Discovery Day. And that's where they take you, they show you the product, they show you some behind the scenes work, they let you know what it will take for you to be successful. They give you insights into their marketing, their suppliers, their customer profiles, and their territories. And for me, Discovery Day, while it does take up, a whole day of your time, because it's normally at least an 8-hour commitment, it's been worth it for all the Discovery Days that I've gone on, because that's where I really got to see the information in the FDD come to life. Because you can read something, but then for you to go in and experience it is another thing. And so during one of the discovery days, well, the discovery day that did not work out for us. I remember we were so gung ho and all in that the partner said, well, hey, let's start talking about territories and in areas that would be good for you. And in that case, this company used customer profiles and analytics that were developed by what's called a Buxton report. And, they would hand us this report and the territory would get a score. And that would be based on the customer's spending patterns, the cost of their home, their jobs, the number of children, all of those types of demographics. And based on how the closer they were to 100 would mean that they were a ripe area for this particular franchise. Long story short, we were offered a territory that would be very lucrative for us. But what we came to find out later is that the corporation tried to take that territory back because it was too lucrative. And so at that point, there was this back and forth with us about whether they had offered us the territory or not. And things didn't sit right. And so that's the gut feeling I'm talking about. And we ultimately decided to walk away, not because we had a disagreement, but because I felt that there were going to be some integrity issues later on down the road with not being able to keep your word. And let me tell you all, if you feel that at any point in time, walk away. It is not worth it because this investment would have been at least 150,000 of my own money to start before my loan even started, right? And so if I'm investing that kind of cash, then I need to have full confidence in the leadership team and in the development team that I'm going to be working with. And I can tell you, I got that with Pecan Jacks. Let's fast forward to the final part of what I consider the franchising step, and that's the signing day. So after I went through FDD with Pecan Jacks, after I went to Discovery Day with Pecan Jacks was in Florida. Not only did they take us, am I muted? Can you all see me? Not only did they take us in the conference room to go through all the details, but they took us behind the scenes into the kitchen to see how the ice cream is made. I realized I haven't even told y'all what Pecan Jacks is. Pecan Jacks is an ice cream and candy kitchen. It is where we make all of our homemade brittle, pralines, and ice cream from scratch. So, boy, if I tell you to come taste our banana pudding ice cream, please know that I'm in there chopping up bananas and crushing up the vanilla wafers to go in it so that we provide you with the freshest ingredients and the most organic ice cream that you can find, all while tasting good, no less. And so when I went to signing day for Pecan Jacks, it was more than just a business meeting. I could feel the familiar vibes that I got from meeting the franchisors and their families, the people that had been working for them for over 10 years, the customer reviews that they shared and testimonials that they shared with us to really give us insights into how people felt about the product and, more importantly, the brand. And so when I think about why we made the decision to go with Pecan Jacks, it was because we could see ourselves in that brand. Pecan Jacks is a brand that really values family. Like I said earlier, I'm a mom of 3. So my children work in the store. We're only 10 days open, but trust and believe my kids come on Friday evenings, wash their hands and put the gloves on, and they're serving ice cream samples to our customers. And so they've watched their dad and I from the signing day, training, and now to launch really put blood, sweat, and tears into this. And so they know that they're watching us build this legacy, but they also know what it means to be a full-time entrepreneur. And that feeling is priceless.
I love that.
That feeling is
Yeah, so
priceless.
you continue. I have a question for you, but if you had
Yep. Go ahead, ask the question, but I wrote some things down because I know I start talking a lot and I don't get to your point.
no, it's all substance. My question was, okay, you were able to hone in on what mattered the most because you had been around enough, gone to enough days where you were saying, okay, I'm locking in on these aspects because I need to know that this is a marriage, a partnership, long term. Here's what I need. I need to feel like this values aligned,
Yes.
feel good about who I'm working with, et cetera. When it came down to the business itself, like the economics of the franchise versus other options,
Yep.
how did Pecan Jack separate itself from a performance perspective or from an opportunity that you saw in the Atlanta market, which you were obviously the first shop to open up? How did you think about just the economic opportunity side of things?
So of course I looked at the margins. I'm like, what kind of money y'all making? And I tell people now I slang ice cream. I mean, that hustler mentality, I'm out here slanging ice cream because there are millions to be made in this ice cream business. Like that dessert, candy, sweet treats, it's truly a multi-million dollar business. And when you are providing what I would consider somewhat of a luxury good, there are ways that you can look at the margin and find ways to bring your costs down. right? So what I started to do is to look at what the product offerings were, period. And for me, I wasn't, if I'm being honest, I'm not even a brittle girl. I grew up in DC, right? Brittle is something that's kind of like in the South. Of course, I loved ice cream and all the candy and all of that, but there are parts of the brand that didn't necessarily speak to me the same way as certain products did. But for me, I started to think about what it would mean for the greater market where I would be. And Atlanta is the South, and the South is the South. And people here love their toffees, their their pecan brittle, their pistachio brittle, their ice cream, all of that sweets. That what Atlanta was definitely a market there. I started to think about also supply and demand. Jenny's has a foothold on this market down here. I know who my competition is. I mean, we did a complete analysis. When I tell you the business school, the MBA degree came into play, it sure did. It like none other. But what I realized is that Pecan Jacks had a differentiating factor that Jenny doesn't have. And what that is we offer ice cream for everyone. So of course we have our classic flavors for the kids and the family, but we also offer alcohol infused ice cream, and that is not available here. We have a boozy something another ice cream in DC that I'm aware of, but in this market, nobody is offering that. And I saw that as the cash cow. Okay. But what I will tell you is just as much as I knew that that would be a strong differentiator here in the Atlanta market, what I didn't know is that it would require me to get a full alcohol license for the city of Atlanta and the state of Georgia. And guess what? Because I was the founding franchisee, my franchisor didn't know either. Because in the state of Florida, because alcohol is an ingredient that is cooked out, an alcohol license isn't required, but it is in Georgia. So as we're going through the process and I'm looking at my fees and we're going through, we had a big halt when they said, "What about this alcohol license?" And by the way, we had to hire an attorney. I still don't have it. I should have it next Friday, but it is a long process, right? And so you ask about what I was looking at, right? I was looking at the fees, the margin, the cost of goods sold, the suppliers. One of the things I realized, we have a dairy supplier here in Atlanta. I can get my dairy in 2 days. It takes them 7 days to get their dairy down in Florida. Why? Because the supplier's here. The supplier is in Georgia, right? When I look at my dry ice supplier so I can ship my ice cream across the country, the supplier is here in Georgia. So I started to think about what it would mean, one, to have lower delivery costs because I am positioned nicely around my suppliers, what it would mean for me to actually have an upcharge on my alcohol flavors because I need to pay for this alcohol license, right? I started to do those different scenarios just to make sure that this will still be a lucrative opportunity and also a differentiator from a corporation like a Jenny's that has this market, pretty saturated at the moment.
Incredible stories, number one,
Thank
and I love how you broke that down because that was a very set of real considerations and real value differentiators. And it shows also like it doesn't matter how much homework, right? You went in on the MBA, you pulled it all out, you checked all the boxes, and then boom, a huge consideration pops up, which you could argue is an opportunity too, right? Because if now it's a barrier entry for somebody else who thinks they can just do what you're doing, it's a whole process, and funds required to get that done. A happy early license day. Sounds like that's happening
you.
next
So
Friday. In the Atlanta market. I already know that's going to be insane. Um, some of what we're talking about is rolling with the punches. I know you have an incredible story of, because we talked about it. You're like 12 days in with the doors open, but then you also said a year and a half ago was when you actually decided to make the moves. We want to get into what happened in that year and a half. Tell us that story. But before you go there, you mentioned that 5 chains, right? You want to be able to really be, you're thinking about scale right now, right? I even heard you mention just now shipping ice cream cross country, which tells me that there's another element of the business that's not just come in and get served. Right. Tell more around like your bold vision for where you think this can go. And then we'll go back into the last year and a half and kind of getting in gear and in the kind of rolling with the punches along the way as you're just trying to open up.
Listen, I think people look at the store and they're like, "Oh, you have a brick and mortar. Are you gonna work there every day?" And I was like, they will see my face, but there's so much to be done, Brandon. And I think I'm a visionary. And so while I love to serve people, which is why I'm in HR, right? I love to help, I love to serve and bring joy. My mind is already somewhere else. So yes, I want to ship the ice cream to those who are not in the Southeast region because that's primarily where our stores and the expansion is happening at the moment. Two, I want to like really take off with events. When we went to open this store, finding the right location for your business is paramount. And so many people told us no because they don't know the Pecan Jacks brand. And rightfully so. It started at the beach in Florida. Many people told us no. There were like high traffic areas that I was, wanted to be in. The rent was expensive, but I was willing to take that risk because the payoff and the ROI would be great. And they weren't willing to take the risk with us because we weren't Baskin Robbins or Brewster's, which is, known more nationally. But when I tell you the spot that did say yes to us, it was the perfect match because the landlord knows Pecan Jacks. He's like, "Is this the same thing in Florida?" And I was like, "Yes. Are you familiar?" He's like, "Yeah, my family and I go to Destin every year." So that right there told me he wanted us to be there just as much as we wanted to be in that lease. The leased space that we ended up with is it's the retail space under Georgia Tech student housing. Let me tell you something. I got built-in customers upstairs. These students come up and down the stairs in the elevator all day, all day. And so for me, I see that as an opportunity to get more involved and more engaged with the Georgia Tech community. So when I start talking about what else we can do with Pecan Jacks, I need to be at the university. That school is huge, right? I found out this week, just sitting in the window doing some work, that they have a community day every Wednesday and I can set up my table and pass out samples. That's what I will be doing because my goal is to make sure that their HR team knows that we can provide lunch and learn opportunities or staff appreciation events or whatever. So we can be at the games. We can become a vendor in their stadium. Sherika's mind is all over. And so my goal is to, yes, make sure our brick and mortar is up and running, but we want to create a footprint that is large enough for people to know who the brand is because we're known for three things, okay? Strong customer service, quality control on the product. The product is going to be the same regardless of which store you go to. And it's going to be clean. I call it the three C's. Anybody who works with me, you got to be up for the three C's, the customer service, the control on the product, and you got to make sure that this place is spotless because nobody wants to eat from a place that's not clean or at least doesn't look clean. Like it can't work. And for a luxury brand, that is an absolute must. And so when I think about vision for this, that's just what's come to me in the last 10 days. Come talk to me in another 10 months and I'll give you more. But I have a lot in store for Pecan Jacks.
Wow. It's crazy because just hearing you talk, like it's almost like you're built for entrepreneurship, right? And so, and I think a lot of people can feel that, which is it's not easy, but nothing's
Mhm.
easy. But once you kind of unlock your natural gifts and let them off the leash, you know what I mean? You unleash. There's literally no ceiling. There's no limit to where you can go. And I can hear that as you kind of just are thinking about where you want to go with this thing. You just need some time, right? And
Yeah.
some space and some opportunity. And I love that. So let's finish off by talking about okay. So now we see the ambition. You basically are bringing a brand to the market, and you're about to people just get ready for what they're about to see in that market because you about to bring in alcohol, bring in a level of service, bring in basically a new brand which has unlimited possibilities to the game. That's the upside. Walk us through the reality of getting this store open after a year and a half. How long did you think it would take? How long did it take? How much did you think it would cost? What percent did it come over? Just kind of get us some of the realities as these surprises and these things opening up this first store you had to go through.
So look, when you sign, third part of the process, signing day, we had 12 months to open our store from the date of signing to the open with 12 months because as mapped out, you got a couple of months for site selection. The store size is 1,320 square feet. It don't take all that. Like it should not take, 6 to 9 months to build out 1,300 square feet. And then you do your training and your launching and your marketing and all that, and you go out the door. So a year should have been more than enough time. Well, as I mentioned before, when we went through site selection, it was a little more difficult than I thought because we weren't a nationally recognized brand, nor were we on the SBA directory that a lot of banks use for funding franchises. Funding a franchise is different than buying a house, is different than a personal loan, is different. There are banks that are set up for franchise lending and they have a process that they follow. Well, the SBA list that they would like you to be on has been deprecated for the last almost 2 years. So it's like if you already on it, great. But if you're not on it, then you're out of luck. And so for us, funding became somewhat of an issue because of the lack of appeal to the brand for the brand. So, people told us no. I think for us to find a decent location, it probably took almost 4 months because we wanted to make sure that we didn't just say yes to anything. When we finally got the location and we got the funding straight, our bank was so strict about the types of contractors that we could use. We could only go with a commercial contract. And listen, the store that we have is beautiful and it has some intricacies, but I strongly believe it could have been done by a residential uh, contractor who had the right license and experience. But because we had to go with a commercial contractor, that meant that our little $230,000 job was now being categorized with $1 million projects in hospitals and other commercial projects. And so we're peanuts compared to those. And so as a result, we didn't get the same level of attention and or response when we went out for bid. We ended up going with a Black owned business here who rolled with us from day one. And they were great, except that when we got started in August of 2024, one of the first things, we had to go through and get some architectural drawings and engineered drawings and all of that kind of permits and things with the city. And so we started the project by, cutting the concrete of the floor to kind of put in electrical and plumbing pipes under the ground. Well, as soon as they went to cut the concrete, they hit tension rods that support the building. And if you remember earlier, I told you we are underneath student housing at Georgia Tech. So there are 400 residents that live upstairs and there's a garage beneath us. And so it was a major incident because 17 tension cords were cut, not just one, 17. And these tension cords are so strong that take, they, they're generally 6 inches under concrete. They rose to the top of the concrete, and the pressure could lift the concrete up, hit you in your face, or do all sorts of things. And there are people who have lost their lives in these types of accidents. And so that incident caused the city of Atlanta to condemn the garages. It put a 60-day work stop order on our project. We had to engage 5 different insurance companies, and $300,000 later is where we landed in December. So when I tell you it was not anything that we could have ever planned for, I learned a lot though. I know this. Every contractor, I was really happy though that the bank made us go through this whole commercial bidding and I didn't go with just Joe Blow on the side of the road because everybody and all of our subs had to have a certain amount of insurance, had to have liability, a lien waiver, all of those things. And I will tell you, Brandon, I thought that my dreams were evaporating right before my eyes because you would never expect that kind of incident to happen on this 1,300 square foot build out. But it actually delayed our project. Like I said, several claims later, we're open now. Our grand opening was February 16th. It was a long time coming. And the timeline that the franchisors had given us was just blown at that point. But I'm telling you, I couldn't have picked a better group to be with because they were supportive the entire time. We have weekly check ins and have had for the last 8 months. Every Wednesday at 11 a.m., I'm talking to my franchisors. They came up here once the incident happened and wanted to, once we got back on track, wanted to just make sure that everybody was aligned. And we had a lot of face to face meetings. But I will tell you, no matter how much research you do, sometimes things happen. But you have to have a certain amount of resilience and fortitude to keep going because this entrepreneurship thing ain't for the weak at heart. You gotta make sure that you have a community behind you and that you have the perseverance to keep going because I strongly believe that the payoff is in the pudding and it's coming. I see it. I see it happening, but we've had to invest so much more time and ultimately much more money than we initially thought because of the funding partners that we ended up going with. Instead of doing an initial 10% investment, they asked us to put 20% cash up. Also, when it came time to start funding some of our operational costs, we ate up our free rent that you normally get when you're building out a store. We weren't paying rent during the incident, but I was supposed to be open so that I could benefit from not paying rent and just taking in the revenue. And so we've had to really think about how we fund the business to make sure that we are successful in our first year, but we're doing it. So
Yikes. You know what I mean? That's all I can say.
yeah.
But here's the thing though. I think when it boils down to it, I think a lot of lessons to be gained. One, this is hard, right? So just go ahead. If you're thinking about pursuing this track, remove the gloss and the glitter that's on top of the concept and get down to like what it's really about. And it's a bunch of hard work, hard decisions, major costs. And so your payback period obviously got pushed out. But when I think about, another big takeaway for me is like the quality of the decisions that matter the most, right? So yes, you did not know that you had to get a liquor license. Yes, you did not know you were going to hit tension rides. Yes, you did not know that you were going to have a harder time getting, in bank loans, right? You had to put a little bit more down. But when it boiled down to it, you chose the right franchise and franchise partner in the
Yes.
right location. So once you kind of get through, these hiccups, you can make the argument, yours is more on the side of like almost everything that could have gone wrong had gone wrong. Now it feels like everything else is kind of smooth sailing. But the most important thing is, had you had the wrong franchise partner and these things would have happened, you might feel a lot different about your level of excitement launching this store after the 18-month period based on how they, didn't show up or didn't care,
Right.
might be. Or you could have run into the situation for, a location that was not stellar. So when you opened up, you wouldn't have had ultimately the foundational traffic or whatever, you needed to really get off the ground and run it. So I think it just goes to show the importance of really focusing on the right decisions and, the things you can control, because a lot of stuff, as you can see, that you can't control will pop up, but you can always get back to like those core foundational pieces that matter the most, right? That you could control. So I could talk to you all day, Sherika, but we got 2 minutes left. Tell us, what would you share that we haven't covered that you think will benefit folks in our network who are thinking about making this plunge into entrepreneurship, either fractionally to start or going all in and or, anything that somebody specifically interested in franchises, may want to know.
Talk to those who've done it before you. I mean, and learn from their experiences and quite honestly, their mistakes so that you don't repeat them. I think, Brandon, you hit on a key element of this. Franchising is a partnership and it is like a marriage, quite honestly. I talk to my franchisors often, and because I've talked to other people, I realize that I have more support than most folks. Find what works for you. Because this is new, I needed that initial support. When I go to store 2, 3, 4, and 5, I'm good. I got it. But at the outset, I needed that support. And so think about what works for you, your leadership style, your lifestyle, and choose accordingly. Because this franchise agreement for our group is 10 years. I mean, yes, you can sell, but that's not my goal. My goal is to be in it, to win it, and to grow and to really use this as a legacy building opportunity for my family. And then finally, I would say, do it afraid. I would be lying if I told you I wasn't afraid. I was scared as hell, but be thoughtful about how you calculate risk. I chose to make that a, $150,000 investment because it was sitting in funds that weren't really performing that well. I mean, they were all right, right? At this point in my life where I'm in my early 40s, I can afford to take the risk. Do it now, because when I'm 50 and 55, I want to be sitting on the beach, the same beach outside of Pecan Jacks, right? And so really just think about what works for you and your lifestyle and talk to folks who came before you.
There you have it. So look, everybody, this will be the first stop I make when you're in Atlanta. Hit
Yeah.
up Pecan Jacks right under Georgia Tech. I mean, if you have any HR, as you can see, Sherika handles business, and she's some of the best, one of the best in the game. Hit her up for that as well. So Sherika, just want to say thank you. Appreciate you being real, being transparent, spending some time when you're opening up your franchise. Wish you all the best, and we'll make sure we stay connected with the network. So you have a good one. I'll
Thank
definitely be in touch.
you. Thank you all. Enjoy.
All right, take care.
Take care.
Bye.